of the One Moment Podcast. I am your boy and your co host, Kevin. And we have an amazing young man, very distinguished young man on the show today. He has authored and written multiple books. He is a leader, a coach, a trainer. He does a lot in the community for the community. He does a lot in mental health and for the field of mental health. And I definitely have to say that the first time he was on our show, I learned that he was a retired officer in the country of Canada. And so I thank you for your service again. And so, everybody, let's welcome the one and only Mr. Doug Lawrence.
Thank you kindly for such a great introduction. It's,
Absolutely.
yeah, I was trying to, when you said that I'd been on before, I was trying to sort of reconnect with my mind to sort of be able to say, okay, what did we talk about? I don't want to bore your audience with the same stuff again. So, let's try and figure out something that we can land on. I am a retired police officer, and uh, 25 years. Uh, I did, as a result of that, post traumatic stress, and some of this is obviously going to be repeat. Uh, and my coping mechanism at that particular time point was to take the cap off the bottle of Scotch whiskey, throw it away, and drink until I thought I had solved the world's problems. So I'm, sort of looking at this from the aspect of what message do we want to send out to to your listening audience that we haven't already told them. And I keep coming back to the mental health piece and uh, its impact on me, and the impact that it had on my wife and two children, and the fact that, um, while it didn't directly have an impact on my wife and her passing, it did have an impact.
Yeah. Wow. And that's sad. And, I think you're right. Last time you were on, we didn't dig too much. I mean, we spoke a lot about mental health, but not until it's, I don't think it's impact in your life, directly on you, so on and so forth. We got a little bit into your, I think you said drinking, um, but a lot of our focus was also on the gaps of mental health, right? And I know that Canada, there's a lot of gaps in mental health, and in Canada, and not just in Canada, also in the U.S. And I know that you started part of that. Your experiences in law enforcement. You started your business. You became a trainer, coach, and all of that to help bridge that gap, or some of those gaps, anyways. And so, I I love what you're saying as far as let's kind of dig more into the mental health piece as far as its direct impact, right? I love that because mental health is so broad, so encompassing. We can talk about the gaps, we can talk about direct experiences, indirect experiences, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's important to realize, you know, or at least to talk more about mental health, to bring more awareness to mental health and its impact on the personal, community, family, and the global scale.
No, I agree, because I was thinking much the same sort of thing. And the I was in a conversation here just the last couple of days where that was one of the things that came up in the conversation, was the impact that issues with your mental health have on not only on yourself and your immediate family, but also on those that are, around you. And I think of, when I was still a serving police officer and stationed in a remote area, uh, we sometimes we were our own support group. And because, number one, we were afraid to talk about it because that was not what big boys talk about. So we ended up, kind of shelving that and leaving it by itself. And then when we did find the courage to start to have that conversation, then that's when we were told that we needed to button it and, okay, Buttercup, get back to work, and you've got to deal with things that way. Because when I think of some of the traumatic experiences that I had, and I had no support. In fact, my main support person was my soon to be wife at that particular time in my life. And she ended up being the support person on top of, I guess, she had a contest or a battle between that and the bottle of scotch as to who was going to win out. And um, whenever she was able to, participate in my self care, that's where I saw differences and stuff. And, should have triggered something back then when I saw what actually took place when she kind of stepped in, was that it started me to think about self care and started me thinking about, okay, what are some of the coping skills you can put into place to deal with some of this trauma and stuff that you're experiencing. And, some of it was, you know, not the greatest in the world. Some of the experiences that I ended up experiencing were stuff that I even have to deal with mentally, even to this very day. And that reminds me, that was the conversation the last couple of days, was the whole aspect of hanging on or having as part of my life some of those traumatic events. Just, I can't seem to shake them or get rid of them.
No, and I think, for a lot of people, we have an experience, and I think it's kind of learning, right? Like learning what works. I think that's really what it is, and that's what I kind of was picking up from what you were just saying. Is you had an experience, and some of it was learning what worked versus what didn't work. So let me ask you this then, right? Because we're talking about mental health and its impact on you, your family, and relationships like that. What did you learn during your, I'm gonna say, lack of coping with it? In that moment, you probably could have been looked at as coping. But what do you feel like uh, was some of the things that you learned to not do, or you learned that made it worse as you look back on it now?
I think one of the main things was that um, I needed to ask for help, because now that I think of it as we're talking, I'm thinking, okay, well, that's a great idea, asking for help, but who are you going to ask? And there were nurses in smaller remote communities that I could have driven to, but once again, you feel I'm the tough person. I can deal with a lot of this on my own without bringing anyone else in, especially some of the nurses and that. But that would have been a coping mechanism that I could definitely put into practice, that I didn't think about, because now that I think I was more concerned about the image, and if I needed to ask for help, then what about all these other people who haven't had the so-called training and stuff that I've been given? And how are they going to be able to, if I don't deal with it and keep it all bottled up inside of me, how are they going to be able to deal with what I'm going through right now?
Hmm. That is a huge one. And I think a lot of people don't look at it from that perspective. I think a lot of people look at it from the idea of I have to keep it in because if I tell anybody, it's going to scare them. And it makes me think of a guy who deployed to Afghanistan, a couple of deployments over there, and as he was hanging out with some of his college buddies, they were all talking. He had just got back, been back a month or two, and they were like, "Hey, well, what do you think of, right now?" And or what are you thinking of right now, or something of that sort, because they were all trying to like depict on how people are similar and different or what have you. And he told them like what his thoughts were, that I'm trying to always think about an escape, that if somebody comes in from this door right here, I have this door over here, I have that door over there, but if I can't escape, I have this as a weapon. I can gerrymander this and use that as a weapon. And like he just started going down the list, and everybody kind of like you know went into a shock, like dude, something is wrong with you, something is crazy, and you need help type you know thought processes amongst them. That's when he realized that if I tell people, people are going to think I'm crazy. And but yet, okay, and I shared that experience because what you shared was important. It is about realizing that if I talk about things, I'm able to help somebody out.
Yeah, one of the things that um, I also learned that is probably more in my life as I know it today, but is the aspect, and I had to do that with when we were off before we started the broadcast today. I had mentioned about speaking to some human resource students and the travel on the roads and all that sort of stuff. And one thing that I did that I hadn't been doing before was a disclaimer that I would read this disclaimer, which basically said that, we're going to be talking about some mental health issues and, in some cases it could be death by suicide and all that sort of stuff. And if you feel triggered at any time, here are some coping mechanisms that, on top of whatever ones of your own that you want. And that's that's going to be not only my own personal coping skill going forward now, even at this stage in my life, but is something I would share with others to be able to say, if you get into a conversation, it probably wouldn't, and you have a feeling or a sense that it's one that you're going to be talking about sensitive issues and stuff like that. This is a good place to use the disclaimer to be able to say, we're going to be talking about some very sensitive type issues, and kind of like just repeat what I have already stated, and put that into practice.
No, right? Absolutely. There's so many ways to be able to talk to people and to bring about awareness, and definitely. And I appreciate you being on the forefront of that. I do. And yeah, ladies and gents, and whoever is listening and or watching us, if you are ever triggered, please utilize your resources. As this young man is saying and emphasizing, there are many resources. There are many coping skills. Use whatever works to help you. And you mentioned suicidality. Let me ask you this: did you ever, in the midst of your trauma, in the midst of your mental battles, before you got help, did you ever have thoughts of harming yourself? Or
There was a time when, um, short answer is yes, but And yes, but and the but part is the aspect of it came at a time when my wife to be, Deborah, had gone back home to her parents' place to get everything ready for the wedding and that. And the separation caused me some anxiety and caused me to have suicidal thoughts. And I had, like, as far as, you could just pick up the phone and call and say, this is how I feel. But there were no telephones. So, you had to figure out how else am I going to deal with this? But yes, I did have, I did have those type of thoughts for sure.
Let me ask you this because I think it's important to look at both sides here. And listen, folks, let me preface on what I'm about to ask and on how I'm gonna ask it. If it was a real life scenario where he was sitting in front of me, I would ask him if, as far as like a therapeutic manner, I would ask. I'm not doing. I'm not going. I'm not trying to ask him certain questions as I'm trying to provide therapy. Right? No, no. I'm not trying to do therapy here. This is not what we do. There's some similar overlaps when you interview people. On what I'm about to ask him is very educational because I think it's important for the public to understand. And so, again, we're not doing anything as far as therapy. I'm not providing him no therapy, and he is not, he is just sharing his own experience with me and with y'all. What were some of your triggers that had you thinking about harming yourself, if you don't mind? I know from previous conversation, but we never spoke directly about this, so I only have this much of an understanding, very minute understanding. So I'm asking that on a general manner because I got another question I want to ask too.
I
After
think
that,
the main trigger was being relocated as a police officer. So I'm in community A and some trauma and stuff takes place and that. And then the powers to be have decided that I needed to be transferred to another smaller community to work there. And so what was happening, and more so me than Deborah, but was the fact that when I relocated to this new community, all it took was something insignificant, and that would trigger memories of what had taken place back. So if I had dealt with somebody who was suicidal in community A, when I went to community B, there would be those triggers that I would end up experiencing that I would have to figure out how am I going to manage those because I know from experience that it's a fait accompli. It's just it's going to happen, and I got to deal with it.
well, and that is similar to flashbacks and emotional numbness, things like that. Some of your very broadly and widely known post traumatic stress disorder symptoms. And again, I'm not diagnosing you by any means, right? Like I'm not, but those are similar, very relatable symptoms to
Yeah,
the experience of post traumatic stress disorder, also PTSD. Wow. So let me ask you this then on the same side. And again, for anybody who's listening or watching, I'm asking educationally here for y'all to understand, not trying to give him therapy. I can't legally or ethically give him therapy. He's in Canada. So what were some of your uh, protective factors that stopped you from uh, taking action or harming yourself?
I think the most important one was uh, my soon to be wife Deborah. At that particular time point, it was because we used to write letters back and forth to each other while we were in that in between stage of being engaged, but we weren't married yet, and we were still, gosh, I don't know, 1,500 kilometers away from each other. So there was didn't have the same communication that you would like to have had, and the same ability to be able to work your way through, you know, what you were experiencing, how it made you feel, what could you do differently. Um, if it happens again, how am I going to deal with this? So all of those factors fit into that as well.
Wow. A healthy, positive, supporting relationship. And thank you for sharing that. I do appreciate that. Let me ask you a follow up question, and I'm asking because I work with suicide every day, so these are similar questions. Well, when I'm on the clock, of course. Um, and so some of the questions I'm asking will be very similar to me doing an assessment on somebody. How long did you struggle with some of those thought processes?
Um, I think the issue of separation and that would have been about 6 months, and then we were able we I flew down to where she was so we could get married, and and it would have been about 6 months.
6 months. Wow. There and so when we speak about, I know last time you were on, we spoke about the gaps in law enforcement, mental health, and EAP at that time, like many different things that were that we have now versus back when, right? So besides your relationship, like with your soon to be wife at that moment, um, what else was going on for those 6 months to help you? Like, what type of resources did you have? And let me preface this, right? I am asking this because it's important to look at how times have changed from back when to current time.
So during that 6 month time period, nothing really changed. There was no support, and there now that we've been talking and I've been thinking, I did have um, I did have the nursing population that I could probably have gone to and said, here's what I'm experiencing and stuff like that. And as I'm reflecting back, I think that there were times where I did, because there was one nurse in particular um, who I always turned to if I just needed somebody to, I had to drive 70 kilometers or whatever it was to where she lived, but just to have that conversation with her was sort of therapeutic in nature, because I could tell her pretty well anything, and there was always that circle, right, of you don't share anything outside of that circle. And working with her, I felt comfortable that that was the case with her, was that I could talk openly and freely, and from that there would then be the spin-off for myself of it being something that was therapeutic in nature. So um, so those that would be I never, I think I was trying to remember, I think I flew out once to visit Deborah before the wedding. And that by itself, was also very therapeutic as well. Um, but I would have to say the primary one during that 6 month would have been the nurse in that small community.
Wow. Mm. And as a clinician, somebody who works in the field, and who used to work in outpatient practice, I am paneled with quite a few EAPs, and so there's so many organizations and resources out there nowadays that didn't have back in 80s, 90s, early 2000s, and it shows you how much time has changed. So let me ask you this then, right? Another question. How did your experiences of that trauma and those complex trauma or multiple traumas impact your relationship with your wife and your close and personal relationships?
I think where I think where things came to fruit to to be where it became obvious to me, and it certainly wasn't me discovering on my own that something had to change. It was actually we were we'd gone to Winnipeg, Manitoba to deliver a training course for a whole day on mentoring, and um, somebody in the audience had asked her, and how did this impact you? And she said, well, he doesn't know how close he came to losing the three of us because of his behavior. And it was because of my drinking at that particular stage, because I hadn't quite discovered what Deborah's role is, and I use that term loosely, I guess, what her role was and how she could help me get through some of this, uh, especially to, the aspect of using alcohol as a coping mechanism had to stop. And so I was trying to do it on my own, and it wasn't working well. And so she was trying to help me as much as she possibly could. But there was always that, you know, I wasn't the nicest person when I had been drinking. I wasn't the nicest person in the world to have to deal with. And she did her very utmost, her very best to try and, you know, make me smart or get me to smarten up and change. Because if I didn't, she had already drawn a line in the sand and said, if you don't change, we're going to change.
Wow, that is so sad and beautiful the way everything kind of played out. If you don't change, something's going to change. Wow. So, how long did you drink what you feel like was problematic for? Like, what did that look like? And I asked that because a lot of people will drink to oblivion to help cope. A lot of people drink, you know, a couple of 40s a day to help them cope. Some people drink till they start feeling the blues, and then they have that little cutoff switch that kicks on. So, what did your drinking look like to help you deal with the stuff that was going on?
Well, I think that it, it was a fallacy more than anything else that this drinking of alcohol was going to help solve or was going to solve. And so I needed to get out of that environment as quickly as I could and get into something where it was more positive and someplace where I could draw on my wife and two children to be able to get the support that I needed to move forward. And it's been what 6 years now since I've had a drink, and um, yeah, it's been 6 years, and fortunately, Deborah got to see me where I wasn't that raging alcoholic. She got to see me before she passed on from cancer, so um, that's a blessing unto itself.
Wow. That is yeah, a beautiful, beautiful thing. So I have to ask him because you're talking about being sober. I think you said 6 years. I
Yeah.
have to ask. Do you
Mhm.
consider yourself to be in long term recovery or short term, whatever? Do you consider yourself to be in recovery or however you would describe that?
Yeah, I could go with the long term recovery. Yeah, long term recovery with no intent of returning to the old. And it's funny because it's not funny, but it's every once in a while I'll be at some event of some sort, and they'll be having drinks, and I'll walk by somebody who's got a drink, and I'll go, well, one wouldn't hurt. And I like, you kind of go like, what do what do I got to hit you with to get you to, don't think like that.
It's funny you say that because I can smell me some good old pot right now. And I don't mean just tobacco store stuff you buy. I mean actual real deal, pot. And I'll get a good whiff of that and it'll bring back memories. I'll be like, man, don't you want to hit or two of
Yeah.
that? So I can identify with you on that one. Like, oh my God. Oh my gosh. Well, and it's funny because I don't think that thought ever goes away completely.
Yeah. Yeah.
I really don't. I mean, it's been 13, a little over 13 years.
Good for you.
Um, and thank you. It's one day at a time. And for me, I think it just goes back to that idea of when that thought comes in, like it's almost like a fleeting thought, kind of like you were just describing. When it's a very fleeting thought. I'm not obsessing over it. I'm not. There's no internal desire. It's just a thought process. It just comes and goes. And it's like, okay, and and just so you know, where anybody who's listening or watching, we're not saying that it's okay to drink liquor and do dope and everything else. No, no, no. We're talking about personal experiences with being in recovery. That's the only thing that we are talking about right now. Um, yeah, I don't think that thought ever goes away completely. I don't think it. I think it over time it gets quicker. It gets more fleeting. I think we learn how to recognize it as just a thought versus reality. If that makes any sense at all.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. Yeah, it definitely does. And the other thing is, I have this little voice in my head, Deborah, which says you don't want to go there. So that helps me kind of keep on the straight and narrow.
And you said the little voice. I so identified with that. I so identified with that. Oh my gosh, yeah. I could just sit there and take a look at a drink, and I'd be like, "Do you seriously want those steel hotels and steel handcuffs on you again, or steel bracelets, or what have you?" And I'll just be thinking, "No, I'm good, baby. I'm good."
Yeah.
You know, because I don't want that lifestyle anymore, right? Like, I think that's the reason we, you know, people like you and I, we get sober is because we're tired of dealing with the consequences. It's not the fact we don't like drinking and drugging. We're doing what we were doing. I think we have fun doing it, but we just got tired of the consequences of doing of you know the negative consequences. And so, kind of like yourself, or very similar to yourself, I take a similar approaches. I think that drink through. I think that I play that tape all the way through. Oh, if I take this drink, one ain't going to hurt, but it's the idea that one is too much or too many, and 1,000 is never enough.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, I had low tolerance, like two drinks and I'm an idiot. You know, so why go there? And you know, I actually enjoy getting out of bed in the morning because I don't feel like you know somebody dumped a manure truck up, you know, in your mouth while you were sleeping, and you wake up with this horrible, you know, horrible taste. I don't have that anymore.
Yeah. No, no, and I'm right there with you. I'll wake up in the morning and like I didn't go to sleep till 3, 4 o'clock this morning. I stayed up playing the game, you know, and I woke up 9, 10 o'clock, whatever, you know, eight something this morning. I don't even remember. Somewhere between 8 and 9:30, I guess. But you know, tomorrow, Saturday and Sunday, or tomorrow, Sunday and Monday, or I have to get up early and go to work, work a 12-hour shift, and then I'll be off doing podcasting and video editing and playing the game all week next week. Same, and to me, I think it's exactly what you were just saying. It's exactly to the T what you just said. I get to wake up in the morning. I
Yeah.
don't I don't come to. I get to wake up in the morning. I get to go to work. I get to be able to do certain things. So I get to pay bills versus I have to pay bills. No, no, it is a
Yeah.
privilege. I get to pay bills. And I think that's really where, you know, my challenge to anybody is, and I'd like to get your thought process on it. My challenge to anybody is if you are in recovery, whether you're early recovery or long-term recovery, I think perception is key to quality of recovery because we can be sober, right? Or we can be actually have a quality of recovery. I think there's a difference.
Yes. And it's also a change in lifestyle. And so you can decide what sort of life you want to continue to live, or you can say, okay, I think I need to make some changes, and here's what they are now. How are they going to impact me further? But also, how are they going to impact others around me, the people in the community that I socialize with, you know, my immediate family, and how are these changes going to impact them? And I'm going to suggest that for the most part, that they would welcome uh, a change such as that, where you know our recovery time gets bigger. You know, we're able to manage that a lot more in a manner where it's beneficial to everyone.
Mm. In my studies of recovery and being and recovery programs, one of the things that you know one of the things that I one of the ideals that I help patients understand into I guess understand into practice that recovery is a series of steps that we take each day in all affairs of our lives, in every aspect of our life. It's not just something I make a decision today and then boom, poof, be gone. Everything's good, hunky dory, glory, gold, you know, set of steps with some red, rose petal leaves sprinkled down up and down the stems. No, there's a series of steps that we take each day to the best of our ability. And I always like to emphasize I screw them up royally every single day. And the good news is I don't have to drink liquor or do dope over it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Well, since we are on the idea or the conversation of alcohol and recovery and drinking to cope, I must ask, did you ever do drugs when you were struggling with that trauma? Or was it just alcohol?
Just alcohol.
Okay. Now, I'm curious to know, okay, do you think it is due to the generation you grew up in of why drugs never came into the picture?
That's a good question. And I would have to say that because when I think back to all my associates, there was the people that used drugs were a minority as in comparison to the people that drank, they would be, the majority. Because I think of my parents going to a dance in one of the community halls, and they always had liquor. Didn't matter where they went. They and their associates always had liquor, and they'd say, "Come back to our place," and my dad would fire the barbecue up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and he'd cook hamburgers or steaks or whatever, but it was always wrapped in alcohol. And that age group would be more alcohol than it would be drugs for sure. Um, I think that I'm just trying to recall, but I think that there were a couple, three, four of my associates that had expanded their use of alcohol and to include drugs as well.
Gotcha. No, and I had to ask because I know some people would say, it potentially is generational versus other people would say it's not generational. Um, so how long? So about 6 months of struggling with some thoughts of self harm. I wanted to ask a similar question to time span here. When you were drinking and struggling with the trauma itself, what kind of time span did that look like? Was it 6 months, a year, 2 years?
It would be 2 years.
2 years.
Yeah.
When did you realize that you started drinking very to excess and problematically to cope with it?
Um, it would be right around that same time frame.
Mm, wow.
It, you know, it as harsh as it may sound, but drinking alcohol to the extent that I did was sort of a way of life. As strange as that may sound, it, it didn't seem to it didn't seem to matter where you went or for how long, but at some stage in that journey, alcohol played a part.
No, and it sounds like it. How much damage do you think you done to your relationships during the process, even though during the moment you didn't realize or you probably didn't recognize? How much damage do you think you did?
Oh, there was damage done. Yeah, definitely. Because there was, like I said, I wasn't the nicest person to be around. And so for any of the relationships that, say, that Deborah had cultivated, that, she had to keep an eye on me because bad behavior could, you know, cause or do damage to the relationships that she had cultivated.
Wow. So kind of like a trickle down effect with your drinking and your inappropriate behavior, inappropriate, thought processes. So it's kind of like she's being the mom, raising y'all's kids and not just y'all's kids, but being, having to raise you, maybe being
Yeah.
the father of the house. And I say that because that's what it really is.
Hmm.
Wow. That is, and that is and I asked those questions for anybody who's listening because drinking impacts more than just a person.
Yeah.
It impacts more than just a person's thought processes. It impacts their relationships. It impacts the relationships with the family, the kids, the household. It's more than just a level side scale here, right? This is a familial impact, community impact, and a global impact. And that's what you just heard Mr. Lawrence talk, walking us through was, how it impacted him, but also others. So I do know from my studies in recovery and families, and I'm not a family person, cannot stand working with families, but I understand uh, that when somebody gets sober or gets into recovery, I'm gonna say recovery of some sort, um, there could also be negative impacts on the family as far as like everybody's trying to, figure out what their role is again, especially early on in that recovery process. What did your early recovery process look like as far as, its impact, negative impact on relationships, or was it more of a positive impact where everybody kind of just fell back in line into what their prospective roles were prior to, all the trauma and all the damage?
I had damaged the trust that everyone had in me, and so that had to be rebuilt. And uh, I needed to be able to do that so that I regained everyone's trust and was able to um, interact better with them, sort of rebuild those relationships. But it all started with regaining the trust that they had in me before, the recovery process had really kicked in to some extent. But it that's probably one of the toughest things, was to try and regain the trust, because there were times where, you know you you sort of said, it's okay, I'm only going to have one, and one turned into many, and there went the trust.
Wow. How long did it take you to rebuild the trust between you and your family?
to take it back to where it originally was, it would have been a good 6 months to rebuild the trust. And that's to get it to a place where um, it was as close as I could get it to the way it was, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, it does. And so uh, I was sitting here thinking because you had just made a comment about well, we'll go out and I would make a decision. Oh, one ain't going to hurt and lose the trust again. Uh, I'm curious to know because I see it a lot, especially early on in recovery, where there's a lot of people who would try to get sober. They'll get a week, 2 days, 3 days, a month, then they will relapse, right? And then they'll come back into a detox facility or come back into a 12-step meeting or what have you. Then they'll try it all over again, a week, 2 days, what have you, and then boom, they'll hit the brick wall again. And I see this kind of this this boomerang effect, right? Where they're and then all of a sudden, 6 times later, 6 tries later, they're living a life of full recovery. Did you ever have many relapses early on where you started struggling, like you struggled to get sober for like 2 months, 3 months? Maybe it took you 2 or 3 times.
I when I think back, I think I had made the decision that okay, I obviously have to change my behavior, and I started to do that. The journey wasn't, all roses and hummingbirds, but because I did have those bumps or curves in the road where, you sort of go like, well, I'll just have one, or I would go on a road trip and I'd do my drinking on the road trip because then nobody knew what I was up to. So I had a job that required that I go out and visit offices and so then at night when I came back, I stayed in a hotel. So and sometimes I would get one of my work colleagues would say, well, let's go to the liquor store and then we'll go back to the hotel. And me thinking, yeah, that'll work. Only to end up with what I had experienced for quite a bit of my life. Now I was experiencing it sort of at a different stage in my work life.
Wow. Did you have to change people, places, and things as far as like not hang out with your old, work partners or, uh, maybe, you were asked to, hey, you want to go out, Doug? And, hey, we're going to a strip club or whatever, type of bar or club y'all were going to. Like, man, I can't, not right now. Did you have to like come up with lies to tell people to kind of like, because and I'm asking these questions because there's so many people that do struggle early on and they have questions like, well, what am I supposed to tell my buddies when they ask me to go out, if they ask me to go to a game, if they ask me to go over here to this party with them, go spend time with their family, go to these family functions. So I'm asking these questions because
Yeah,
of that.
yeah. Um, I would say that um, the impact hasn't or wasn't as great as what I experienced more recently with grief. And grief, you become the fifth wheel.
Well, wow. Yeah, you're right. I think grief puts you in a different, I
Yeah,
mean, both of them are a beast in and of themselves. Addiction and recovery and then grief. since having to struggle with grief, and did you or have you had thoughts of, well, maybe one ain't going to hurt, maybe one will help me feel better, or um, maybe even thoughts of self harm since having to deal with grief, or has it just been more of allowing yourself to feel and jump into the action of into the action and program of recovery?
Yeah, I don't, I have, I can honestly say that I have not had any idea whatsoever about self harm. And um, the biggest thing that I struggle with right now is the rekindling of relationships. Um, it's become, it's very much a couple's world that we live in, and so you find you don't always have that person you can turn to have a conversation. So you have to um, sometimes look for alternatives. Uh, maybe it's you meet with somebody you haven't had a conversation with in 6 months to a year, and you send them a text message and say, "Have you got time for a coffee?" or something like that. You resort to different things, but I definitely would say that um, no thoughts whatsoever of going back to drinking. I ask myself, I wonder what that would taste like now, but that's as far as it goes. And then, the aspect of dealing with the relationships and all those things. Um, other than there's the gap, uh, and the gap is just, like for example, I remember when we did the celebration of life for Deborah, and I had people, for old contacts, friends, and that came up and said, we should get together for a cup of coffee or a lunch, and that was 5 years ago, and I'm still waiting for my call for the lunch. So you kind of go, okay, um, obviously, everyone's priorities shift and change because of what it is that I'm experiencing. And now it's how they deal with things, which has an impact on me as well.
Mm. You're right. Relationships and lifestyle changes do have to change. And I can't speak on the grief part of it just because, um, I'm not in your shoes by any means. And so I
Yeah.
do appreciate you drawing a clear distinction as far as like some of the changes, in recovery from, alcohol versus grief. Um, and I appreciate you drawing that distinction. I don't think we've ever had anybody on this show to draw a distinction between the two. That, yeah, there was some lifestyle changes in getting sober, but there's been so much more in when struggling with grief or going through grief, not struggling with grief, but going through the experience of grief.
Yeah, it's quite the journey.
Mhm. Think about it. Life is a journey. It's not
Mhm.
about. This is my philosophy of life. I don't think the destination is important. I think the experience of the journey and walking this journey or running it or crawling it or even rolling on this journey. I think I think that's the most important thing because as you said early on, when we first started, came on the show. If I keep my mouth shut, I don't help anybody. But if I open my mouth and I am willing to share my experience, strength, and hope with somebody, I might be able to help save somebody. I might be able to help make an impact somewhere around the world. So,
And I think that if we all can embrace our life as it is today and ask ourselves, what do I need to do to make this a better place? Then we're all kind of rowing in the same direction with a common purpose. And if we can do that, then, we will make a difference and we won't feel as compelled to have that drink because that's not going to help us with our purpose.
right. Absolutely. Absolutely. I could not agree more. I couldn't have said that any better than what you just said. I want to wrap up with the last three questions. Okay. I'm
Okay.
going to give you the highlight of the show because we've covered a lot of in depth conversation. I mean, just in depth. Wow. If somebody wants to purchase your books, hire you, bring you on as a guest speaker, do some mentoring, coaching with you, um, training, anything of that sort, how would they contact you and where can they find your books?
The books are available on Amazon.com, so you can find them there. Um, and then to reach out to me, you can reach out to me through the website www.talentc, so talent with the letter C on the end, .ca. Or it's the easiest path to me is just a simple email message, and it's Doug.Lawrence, Lawrence, at talent C, so the word talent with the letter C on the end, .ca, and I'll get back to you right away, and we can have a conversation about uh, what your needs are and work through that.
Absolutely. And if there's anybody who's watching or listening to this show, what is one thing you hope they can take away from it?
We've talked about a lot of different uh, nuggets that people could take. I think the big thing, and I use my own personal story, but the big thing is that you need to feel comfortable. So you need to find that safe place to have a conversation. And what you want to be able to do is to be comfortable enough to reach out and ask for help. And whether it's me or whether it's you or whoever, but they do need to feel comfortable enough to reach out and excuse me and ask for help.
Oh, absolutely. Mr. Lawrence, I do appreciate you coming on. Thank you for being willing to come on and talk and share your experience, strength, and hope with others.
Well, thank you for
Oh,
the opportunity.
absolutely. Yes, sir. Anytime you're wanting to come on, you just reach out and let us know. Uh, Folks, listen, you heard it best here today by Mr. Doug. There's help available, there's resources out there. And I hope if you are in recovery or struggling, maybe you're struggling with trauma, substance use, or what have you. Hopefully, you are able to identify. Okay. If you are, not a therapist or anything like that, I don't encourage you to ask very similar questions, especially to people that, maybe to friends or something of that sort. I don't encourage you to do that. Everything that we talked about here was educational and informational only. I was not providing therapy to Mr. Lawrence. I was only asking educational questions for people to be able to understand various aspects and experiences of trauma, substance use, grief, things like that. That being said, Mr. Lawrence, thank you again.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Absolutely. Don't hang up. I'm going to end the live.
Okay.